I've always been the one who made things work, not because anyone asked me to, just because that's who I am. I paid my own way through university. I got a job before graduation. I moved out at 22 and never asked my parents for a single dollar. I thought that was something to be proud of. I didn't realize for a long time that my family saw it differently. They saw it as permission. The summer I turned 31, I was diagnosed with a uterine fibroid the size of a golf ball. My doctor, a soft-spoken woman at the clinic in Kitchener, told me the surgery was laparoscopic. Minimally invasive, she said, but still general anesthesia, still recovery, still a real procedure with real risks. She gave me a window, late August, before the OR schedule filled up for fall. I called my husband, then I called my mother. My mother was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That's the same week as Banff." She wasn't wrong. My parents and my younger brother had been planning a trip to Banff National Park since the previous November. It was their big summer thing. My parents, my brother, his girlfriend. They'd booked a cabin near Lake Louise, put down a non-refundable deposit at the end of February. I knew about the trip. I wasn't invited, but I knew about it. My husband and I hadn't been included because, according to my mother, the cabin only sleeps 4 comfortably, even though it was listed online as a 5-bedroom property. I'd seen the listing myself. I didn't say anything. I never said anything. What I said on the phone that day was, "Mom, I need surgery. I need someone with me." She said she'd talk to my father. My father called the next morning. He said he was sorry about the timing. He said the deposit was non-refundable. $4,000 between flights and accommodation. He said my brother had already requested the time off work, and his girlfriend had been looking forward to it for months. He said, "You have your husband." And then, very gently, as if he were doing me a favor, "You'll be fine, sweetheart. You're always fine." I sat with my phone in my hand after he hung up. My husband, Alec, was standing in the kitchen doorway watching me. He'd heard enough. "They're still going," he said. I nodded. "Your brother too?" I nodded again. Alec crossed the room and sat down beside me on the couch. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" And I loved him for that. I loved that he didn't make it about him, didn't say "I told you so," didn't compare himself to my family. He just asked what I needed. What I needed was for the people who raised me to act like they'd raised me. But I didn't say that. I said, "I need you to be there when I come out of surgery." And he said, "I'll be there." There was one other person I called that night. My grandmother, my father's mother, who lives in a retirement community in Waterloo, about 20 minutes from where Alec and I live. She turned 80 the previous spring. She uses a cane when her hip bothers her, and she still does the Globe and Mail crossword every morning before breakfast. She's the sharpest person I know. When I told her about the surgery, she was quiet the way my mother was quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet. My grandmother's silence has weight to it. When she finally spoke, she said, "What time do you need to be at the hospital?" I told her 6:30 in the morning. She said, "I'll have your uncle drive me. We'll be there at 6. I tried to tell her she didn't need to come, that it was early, that her hip had been bothering her. She said, "Josephine, that's my name." She said it the way she used to say it when I was 10 years old, and trying to argue my way out of something she'd already decided. It meant stop talking. I stopped talking. The surgery was on a Tuesday. My parents and my brother flew to Calgary on the Monday. My mother texted me the night before they left. A long message, longer than any she'd sent me in months, about how much she wished things were different, how the timing was just so unfortunate, how she'd light a candle for me at the church in Banff, how she'd call me as soon as she landed. I read it twice. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe I was hoping there was something in the words I'd missed, some version of "I'm coming home" that I hadn't found yet. There wasn't. My uncle picked up my grandmother at 5:45 and they were in the hospital waiting room before I'd even finished the paperwork. My grandmother had brought a small thermos of tea for herself and a card she'd written by hand because she doesn't trust e-cards. She says they're impersonal and lazy. The card had a little bird on the front, a chickadee, which is the bird she's always associated with my grandfather, who died 12 years ago. Inside she'd written, "You are braver than you think and more loved than you know. I'll be here when you wake up." I did not cry in the pre-op room. I cried in the elevator on the way up with Alec's hand in mine, and I cried a little bit more alone in the curtained bay before the anesthesiologist came in. But by the time I was on the gurney, I'd pulled myself together. I have this thing where I feel like I'm not allowed to be scared in front of people who are scared for me. I don't know where I learned it. When they wheeled me through the double doors, the last thing I saw was my grandmother standing at the edge of the waiting room. She raised one hand. She wasn't crying. She looked completely steady, like a woman who had weathered things I couldn't imagine and knew, from experience, that this would pass. I woke up in recovery with a dry mouth and a strange hollowed-out feeling in my lower abdomen, like something had been rearranged. The nurse told me everything had gone smoothly. She handed me water in a small paper cup and I drank it too fast and immediately felt sick. Alec was there within a few minutes, and not long after that, my grandmother appeared in the doorway with my uncle, who is a large, quiet man who shows affection by standing nearby and looking worried. My grandmother sat in the chair beside my bed and held my hand. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. There's something about her presence. The specific warm weight of her hand, the faint smell of her rose-scented lotion, that has always meant safe to me. I've been trying to figure out how to explain that to people, and I don't think I can. Some people you just feel safer near. She's one of those people. My mother called that afternoon. I was back home by then, on the couch with a heating pad and a prescription for ibuprofen. The call was 4 minutes long. She asked if the surgery went well. I said yes. She told me the flight to Calgary had been bumpy. She said the cabin was beautiful. You can literally see the mountains from the bedroom window, Josie. It's stunning. She said she'd send pictures. She asked if Alec was home. I said yes. She said good. And then she said she had to go because they were heading out for dinner. 4 minutes. My husband was in the kitchen making soup when I came off the phone. He looked at me, and I could tell from his face that he'd heard enough of the conversation to understand. He didn't say anything. He just brought me the soup. The first week was the hardest. I couldn't drive. I couldn't lift anything. My job, I work in project management at a construction firm in Cambridge, has a desk component and a site component. And I'd taken 2 weeks off, but I knew work was piling up. Alec was incredible, but he works too, and he can't exactly do everything. My grandmother came twice that first week. My uncle drove her each time. She brought food, a chicken and sweet potato stew the first visit, lentil soup the second, and she sat with me while I ate and we talked, mostly about nothing. A book she was reading, a documentary about migratory birds she'd seen on CBC, the retirement community's ongoing drama about the new parking allocation system. She never once brought up my parents. She didn't need to. My parents came home on the Saturday, 9 days after my surgery. They texted me from the airport. Not a call, a text. It said, "Just landed. Exhausted, but such a good trip. We'll call tomorrow." They didn't call the next day. They called on Monday evening. My mother talked for about 20 minutes about Banff, the hike they did, the gondola, a restaurant where they had elk for the first time. My father got on the phone and said it had been a real reset. I asked if they wanted to come see me that week, since I was still recovering and hadn't seen them in almost 2 weeks. My mother said they were tired from travel and needed a few days. My father said soon. They came 3 weeks later. I don't want to tell you I was surprised, because I wasn't. Not really. But there's a difference between knowing something intellectually and actually experiencing it. And sitting across from my mother in my living room, while she showed me photos on her phone from a trip she took while I was under general anesthesia, that was a specific kind of pain that I hadn't been prepared for. What I noticed in those weeks was my grandmother watching. She didn't say anything dramatic. She didn't make speeches or pull me aside for serious conversations. But I noticed that she started asking questions in a different way, very specific questions, about timing and details. She asked what day my parents had come home. She asked what my mother had said on the phone the day I got out of surgery. She asked what my brother had sent when I told him about the procedure. He'd sent a thumbs up emoji. I wish I was joking. She would listen carefully and then change the subject, and I thought at the time that maybe she was just making conversation. She wasn't making conversation. My grandmother has one of those small notebooks, the kind with the hard cover, navy blue, about the size of a paperback. I've seen it on her kitchen table before, and assumed it was for grocery lists or crossword clues. It was not for grocery lists. Here's what I found out later. My grandmother had been keeping a record. Every phone call, every text she found out about, every visit or non-visit, every detail I mentioned in passing, she wrote it down. Dates, times, what was said, what wasn't said. She'd started the notebook the day I told her about the surgery. She'd filled almost 30 pages by the time everything came to a head. I didn't know any of this until November. My parents have a tradition. Every year in November, they host what my mother calls a fall gathering, which is essentially a dinner party for family and close friends. It's the kind of thing my mother plans for months. Good china, homemade desserts, a seating arrangement that gets revised at least 4 times. Everyone comes. My grandmother always comes, even though she and my mother have a relationship that I describe charitably as cordial. My uncle comes. Cousins, family, friends, the neighbors my parents have known since before I was born. It's a big deal. My mother takes it very seriously. This year there were about 20 people at the table. I almost didn't go. I'd been feeling distant from my parents since the summer. Not angry, exactly, just distant in the way you feel from someone you've started to understand differently. Like the image has shifted and you can't unshift it. Alec thought I should go. He said, "You don't have to fix anything, you just have to show up." So, everything was normal for the first hour. Wine, appetizers, the kind of conversation that skims the surface of everyone's lives without going too deep. My mother had made her roast, the one she only makes for special occasions, and the table looked exactly the way she always wants it to look. She was in her element. I watched her move around the room and thought, not for the first time, this is what she's good at. The performance of togetherness. After the main course, when people were settling into dessert and the conversation had mellowed, my grandmother stood up. She doesn't stand up suddenly. With her hip, getting out of a chair is a deliberate process. So when she pushed herself up and reached for the edge of the table to steady herself, the room noticed. Conversations stopped. People looked. My mother looked up from the other end of the table. "Mom," she said. She calls my grandmother Mom, as my father's mother. "Do you need something let me get?" "I'm fine," my grandmother said. Her voice was clear. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. 20 people in a room, and every single one of them heard her perfectly. "I just have something I'd like to say." My father started to smile, the way you smile when you think someone's about to give a toast. My grandmother opened her notebook. I felt something shift in my chest. She started with the date, August 12th, the day I went into surgery. She read from what she'd written, not dramatically, not with any theatrical flair, just plainly and clearly, like a woman reading the minutes of a meeting. She read that on August 12th, her granddaughter had undergone surgery at Grand River Hospital, and that on that morning, the following people were present: Alec, and herself and her son. She then noted who was not present and where they were, and that they had been aware of the surgery date since mid-July. She read the date my parents had landed back in Canada, August 21st. She read the content of the text message my mother had sent from the airport. She read the date of my parents' first phone call after returning, August 23rd. She read that my parents had come to see me for the first time on September 9th, 28 days after my surgery. The room was very quiet. My mother set down her fork. I could see her face from where I was sitting, and it was very still, the way a face gets when a person is working hard, not to show what they're feeling. My grandmother turned a page. She said she also had a record of the text messages I had received from my brother during my recovery. She didn't read them in detail. She said there was one, sent on August 14th, which contained one word. She didn't have to say what the word was. Something about the way she paused told everyone in the room that it was not a word that conveyed love or concern. My father cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, I think we're taking this out of context." My grandmother looked at him. She said, "What context would help?" He didn't answer. One of my cousins, who was sitting across from me, very quietly reached under the table and put her hand on my arm. I hadn't told her any of this. I don't know how much she'd already pieced together. My grandmother said she wasn't telling this story to embarrass anyone. She said she was telling it because she was 80 years old and she had learned, over 8 decades, that silence protects the wrong people. She said she had watched her granddaughter recover from surgery, with grace and without complaint, and she had watched the people who should have been beside her be somewhere else. And she had decided that her family deserved to understand what that had looked like. Then she closed the notebook. She sat back down slowly, the way she'd stood up, deliberately, carefully, with dignity. My uncle moved his hand to her shoulder for a moment. The table was silent for a long time. My mother was the first person to speak. She said, in a voice that was very controlled, "I think this conversation would be better had privately." My grandmother said, "I agree, we should have had it privately." In August, someone down the table made a small sound, not a laugh exactly, more like the sound a person makes when they've heard the truth said clearly and it's landed. My father said something about how the timing of the surgery had been difficult, about how the deposit was non-refundable, about how they'd been in regular contact while they were away. I sat and listened. I didn't interrupt. I noticed that he didn't actually dispute anything my grandmother had read from the notebook. He just explained. There's a difference between those two things. My brother didn't say anything. He sat with his hands around his wine glass and looked at the tablecloth. After dinner, in the kitchen, my cousin found me while I was rinsing plates. She said, "I didn't know any of that." I said I knew. She said, "Josie, why didn't you say something?" And I said honestly, because I didn't want to seem like I was making it about me. She stared at me for a second. Then she said, "It was about you. It literally was about you." I've thought about that a lot since then. My grandmother and I sat in my parents' front hallway while her coat was being fetched. She always takes longer to get ready to leave than to arrive. And I told her I hadn't known she was going to do that tonight. She said she knew I hadn't known. I asked her why she'd kept the notebook. She said, "Because I knew that at some point, you would need to know that someone had been paying attention." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just held her hand for a moment. She said, "You have always made things easy for people. You've made it easy for them to take you for granted." I wanted them to see what that actually looks like written down. I walked out to my uncle's car with her and made sure she was settled before I went back inside. The party had mostly broken up. People were getting their coats, saying their goodbyes in that slightly awkward way people do when something true has been said in a room, and no one quite knows how to step over it. In the weeks after, my mother called me a few times. The first call was tense. She said she felt that the evening had been handled poorly, that she and my father deserved a chance to explain themselves, that a dinner party was not the appropriate venue. I listened. I didn't agree or disagree. I said I understood she felt that way. The second call was different. She was quieter. She said she'd been thinking. She said she knew, looking back, that they should have made different choices in August. She didn't say she was sorry. Not in those exact words, but she said she knew it, and I think for her, admitting that was not easy. I don't know what comes next with my parents. I'm not going to pretend I've forgiven everything, and we've all hugged and it's fine. It's not fine, not yet. But I'm also not carrying it the way I was before. That heavy, silent, unremarked upon weight of having been left and not said anything about it. Someone said something about it. Someone wrote it down and said it out loud in a room full of people. And the strangest part, the part I keep returning to, is that it wasn't me. I was so used to handling things quietly, to being the one who made things work and moved on and didn't cause a scene. I had never once imagined that someone else would stand up for me. I didn't think I was the kind of person that happened to. My grandmother knew I was, though. She'd known it for 31 years. She knew it better than I did. Alec and I had her over for dinner last month. Just the three of us, a Sunday roast, nothing elaborate. She brought the crossword, half finished, and she and I worked on it together after we ate while Alec cleaned up the kitchen. The remaining clues were all geography related, which she said was the least interesting category. We argued pleasantly about this for a while. Before she left, she pressed something into my hand. It was the navy blue notebook. I told her I couldn't take it. She said, "I don't need it anymore." She said the record had served its purpose. I put it on my bookshelf when I got home, between a novel I've had since university, and a photo of Alec and me from our first trip to Prince Edward Island. I look at it sometimes when I walk past. I think about what she said, that she wanted them to see what it looks like, written down. I think there's something important in that. Not revenge, not punishment, just accountability. The plain, quiet, unignorable fact of what happened in ink in someone's handwriting on dated pages. You can argue with feelings. You can explain away emotions. You cannot argue with a date and a time and the words that were or weren't said. My grandmother taught me that. She's been teaching me things my whole life, and I've had the good sense, most of the time, to pay attention. That Sunday, walking out to my uncle's car for the second time in 3 months, I held the door open while she got herself settled, and she looked up at me and said, in that very matter-of-fact way she has, "You look better than you did in August." I told her I felt better. She nodded, like that was exactly what she'd expected to hear, like she'd never doubted it for a second.